Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to my YouTube storytelling channel. I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me. Today, I am going to be reading a story called Saccharine, and this is a story that I wrote, and it is dedicated to Ka Bao Moua. As you see on my social media page, I had asked earlier for followers if you'd like me to use your name in any of the stories, please comment on that post. And Ka Bao was kind enough to let me use her name. So this story is dedicated to Ka Bao. Everybody come in, pull up a chair, relax, and enjoy the story with me. This story is intended for mature audiences due to language, adult content, and situations.
I did a lot of bad things, and never did I give in, just 'cause the thought of being vulnerable made me feel less than I am. I have never
I looked up at the darkening sky and wished that the sun was shining instead. Maybe it would help make this dreadful feeling inside me disappear. I knew that everything I felt was a reflection from that sky. It reminded me that I was about to break open a flood, and with it, disaster was about to follow. Downtown Minneapolis was busy, as usual, with cars, men and women in business suits trying to get back to work after lunch. Traffic lights were switching colors, and the exhaust of car dust was in the air. Around me, there were signs of life, but within me, it ceased to exist. I felt as if I was just a shadow following around the crowd. It left me nowhere and gave me no sense. It left me with no purpose. I was alone, it seemed, as the world moved around me. The Hishwire building was close as I crossed the street. I was thankful I was wearing low heels because my feet were already beginning to ache. I was dressed in my best black suit today. My long black hair tied up in a cheek bun, and I had applied minimum makeup. I wanted to look the part of a good woman. I felt heavy as the doors to the building came closer. Taking a deep breath, I walked through the revolving doors and entered. It was busy, and I made my way to the elevators. I pressed the button, stepped back, and took a deep breath. When the silver doors opened, I got on, and they closed before me. When the doors opened again, I was standing on the 10th floor, facing glass windows that read Miller, Jones, and Park, Attorneys at Law. I walked through the elevators with heavy feet and made my way to the glass doors. A pretty brunette woman was behind the desk, and she buzzed me in. She handed me a guest badge and directed me to go 4 doors down. I did as instructed, and when I stopped at the 4th door, my husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, Alan Nelson, was sitting in a chair, dressed all in gray, with his lawyer beside him. I took a deep breath and opened the doors, forcing the two to stand up. Colleen Miller, my lawyer, was sitting on the opposite table, and she stood up to greet me. We shook hands, and she directed me to sit across from Alan and his lawyer. Alan, the biggest mistake I ever did was falling in love with him. He was a good guy from a good background, old money and good heritage. We met in college and dated for 4 years. After graduation, he pursued his master's degree, and I supported him. I was in love with him. He was the first man to make me feel as if I was safe. We were good together, and after he graduated, he proposed, and I accepted. And then I learned that he proposed out of pity to me. He actually had a list of women he dedicated himself to every day. I was just an idea of perfection. That was when happily ever after came crushing down, and I was met with heartache, misery, and pain. Alan was a handsome man with dark hair and brown eyes. He always wore his hair shorter than most men, and his stare was what captivated me and held me. But what lay beneath his heart tore at me from every angle, and it left me bleeding. He never apologized for his ways. Instead, he said if I couldn't take it, then I should divorce him. But I stuck around because I wanted to be a good wife. I worked on finishing grad school and got a job at a major advertising company where I worked as a lead account manager. I made good money and I was going places. But my marriage was slowly drowning, and the word home translated to prison. I came to a prison after work every single day. He bound me in chains with the woman he slept with, and he never cared if I was hurt. So what changed? The night he confessed he had gotten a woman pregnant and was leaving me for her. I was a distraction, he said. I was a mistake. Just hearing the word baby struck me hard with pain, and I gave up. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt me again. Now, as I sat across from him, he looked smug, not even remorseful at his own actions. His lawyer, a rich man named Greg Johnson, was sitting next to him dressed in a black suit with his graying brown hair. Colleen, a woman in her mid-40s, was gathering up paperwork from her folder. She was pretty with light blonde hair and misty blue eyes. She was a fighter, and she made partner in 2 years. That was why I had hired her. I wanted her to rip Alan out for everything he had. I wanted to take him to the cleaners. Are we ready to begin? Colleen asked. Whenever you are, Greg answered. My client has revealed over your offer, and she's not going to take it. As a matter of fact, that offer is an insult. What are you two playing at here? She makes 6 figures a year. Why would she settle for what you have to offer her? Greg smiled, and Alan flinched. Listen, Miss Miller, you and I both know that this offer is, without a doubt, the best offer anyone has ever laid out on a table. If your client refuses to take this offer, do not think that we'll lay it out again. We'll withdraw it and offer her what insulting really is. Do you think tactic like that scares me, Mr. Johnson? I've been working with people like you long enough to know that men like you and Mr. Nelson are nothing but cheap bullies who think money can buy others out. Greg didn't let the insult get to him. We're professionals here. No need to bring out the big guns. I guarantee you that if I were to bring out my gun, you'd notice it. We're not taking the offer. Alan looked up at me. Ka Bao, you'd be wise to take this offer. I looked at him with my brown eyes and straightened my posture. I think my lawyer has given our answer. He leaned forward. Are you serious? If you think I'm going to feel sentimental, you better think twice. I don't think you can feel, Alan. Not unless you're screwing someone between the legs. His face turned red and anger flashed across his eyes. You bitch. I'm not going to take your shit anymore, Alan. I did that for 2 years, and look where it led me. You're a selfish man who only thinks with his dick. All right, Colleen interjected. It's clear that we're not going to take your offer. So this meeting is over. No, it's not, Alan yelled. If you think I'm going to let you drain a penny from me, you better think again. Was that a threat? Colleen asked. Mr. Johnson, I'd be wise and advise your client to keep his mouth shut if he doesn't want another lawsuit slapped against him. Greg stood up. There's reasons why my client is upset. Your client is refusing to work with us. Colleen stood up to face him. Why would she, when it was your client who broke the vow of marriage? As far as I know, my client supported your client for years while he was in school. Every penny paid for his tuition came from her pocket. He committed adultery, and he owes her half of his property and money. To give us an offer of not even close is like a slap to the face. A person who has a track record like yours, I'm ashamed to even think of you as a lawyer. I stood up. I assume this meeting is over. If you have questions, you can contact my lawyer. Thank you, Colleen. She smiled and shook my hand. You have a good day. I turned to go when Alan reached out and grabbed my arm. But Greg pulled him back just as Colleen called security. As the security team arrived, Alan pulled back and dropped my arm. Oh, I dared him to move toward me. Yet he remained silent with his dark eyes. I walked out and heard Alan curse at his lawyer.
I did a lot of bad things, and never did I give in, just 'cause the thought of being vulnerable made me feel less.
I ended my day with my best friend, Amy Tucker, at the bar downtown for drinks. Amy had been my go-to person for as long as I could remember. She never judged me, and she always had a good answer for everything. She was a therapist specializing in abuse survival. She did great community work, and I respected her highly. She was a pretty blonde with large tits, a great ass, and long legs. But she never let it get in her way when men hooted at her. She also cursed like a truck driver. Fuck, she cried as I told her the events of today. You should have seen his face. She smiled and drowned her shot of tequila. I wish I had been there. His dick was probably hanging out with no balls. I laughed. Only you could say stuff like that and make me laugh. A man from across the bar whistled at her and she flipped him the bird. The man laughed and walked away. She picked up her empty glass and shook it at the bartender for a refill. I reached over and took her hand. Thank you so much for everything, Amy. I don't know what I would have done without you here. She waved her hand in the air. Girl, please. As much as you claim I'm a goddess, you would have been fine without me. You're a fighter. You can do anything you set your mind to. So, when is the official divorce date? We're waiting on Alan's counteroffer. If he'll just bend over and give me what I deserve, everything will be signed and over with. But he's not playing fair and he wants a battle. An ugly one, I know, and he's not going to settle for anything less. But I want to screw him so bad it hurts, and that is his money. I don't need it. I'm good on my own. I just want to make him hurt. Amy smiled as the bartender refilled her glass. Yeah, baby, payback time. Once payday hits, it's you and me on a deserted beach. I smiled and clinked glasses with her. You got it. The apartment I lived in was close to the St. Anthony Bridge. Its view was spectacular, and I woke to the sun rising every single day and closed the day with the lights of Minneapolis. It was a one-bedroom apartment with wooden floors throughout, granite countertops, a large living room, and a chef's dream kitchen. You see, I love to cook, and so I admired the designer for his taste in making my dream kitchen. When I returned home from my drink with Amy, I showered and dressed in my black PJs. Then I turned on the TV, lowering the volume down, and settled on the couch with some new design layouts from work. Spencer and Spencer, the advertising company I worked at, was founded by the Spencer brothers, Maverick and Lincoln, although I had never met either one of them. They had branch offices throughout the Twin Cities, but I worked at the corporate one in downtown Minneapolis. I had been there for almost 3 years now, and I had never seen either one of them appear at the office. The ad I had been working on was a resort newly designed in Florida. My boss, Jason Miles, was a great man who worked his ass off to prove he could lead all of us. Although I was the account manager, I still reported to Jason on a daily basis. We worked throughout most of our projects together and had gotten close. He was single and hinted dinner a few times, but I always declined out of respect for him, and also because I loved my job. He got the message, but never really stopped trying. I had just turned the page into my notes when my phone rang. I reached for it on the counter and saw my mother's name, Isabel, lit up on the screen. I sighed. I didn't really want to talk to her right now, but I knew that she wouldn't stop calling. Hi, Mom, I said. Honey, I was just calling to ask how things went today. My mother had been a fan of Alan's from day one. She still couldn't understand why I just couldn't be more patient with him. To her, if I had been a better wife, he wouldn't have the urge to stick his dick in another woman. I didn't take his offer. Oh, she sounded excited. Does this mean you're getting back together? I cringed. The thought of being with Alan again made me want to vomit. No, Mother, you can stop hoping. We're never getting back together. Darling, you have to stop this. Men have the urge to sleep around. Perhaps you don't understand the situation here, Mother. Your son-in-law cheated on me with numerous women and got one of them pregnant. How am I supposed to continue loving him when he's created another human being with someone other than me, who was his wife? Ka Bao, I know you don't really like intimacy, but you should have tried harder. No, Mother, I love the idea of sex, just not fucking around. Watch your mouth, young lady. Why? It's the only time you can hear me. Listen, if you call to say this, then I'm hanging up. Wait, she said. I'm sorry. I don't understand why you won't try again. I mean, marriage is never easy. Take a look at me and your father. We have stuck around for years, and it's taken a lot of hard work, but we made it. Eventually. My father, Darren, was another story to be told. I sighed and rubbed my temple. Mom, I've had a really long day. I'll call you later, okay? I hung up before she could say another word. As expected, she called again. I turned the phone to vibrate and set it off to the side. My eyes filled with tears at the thought of my own mother wanting me to settle for less. She could never see that being faithful was a good thing in marriage. She never would because she herself had never been faithful. Her years of marriage to my father were a horrible tale, and even today, while he was still married to her, she continued to flirt with other men. Why my own father tolerated it was beyond me. But I suppose when you loved someone beyond reason, you could overlook it. It had me wondering if I ever really loved Alan at all. I jerked awake from the nightmare I was having of Alan sneering at me through black teeth. I sat up, drenched in sweat, and took a deep, unsteady breath. The nightmares were reoccurring, and it was coming more often, especially after seeing Alan. I swung my legs over the bed and got up, thinking some milk would calm me down. I walked to the kitchen in the dark, my feet padding on the wooden floor. I opened the fridge and grabbed a carton of milk, kicking it closed with my foot. My fingers found the light switch, and I poured myself a glass. As I downed it, I felt the liquid slide smoothly down my throat, easing the ache almost, as I felt it settle down in the pit of my belly. But I still felt uneasy. I returned the carton, made my way to the couch, and sat down. Nights like these were what left me feeling lifeless. It drained my entire soul and left me feeling empty. Alan had been a weakness of mine for so long, and since we were separated, I had only begun to piece back together what I had lost. I had spent a majority of my life pleasing him, being at his beck and call, and turning myself inside out for him. In return, I got misery and a slap in the face. That did something to a woman, and I wasn't sure if I would ever recover. Sex. That was another story. Alan was never gentle. He did it his way, and sometimes used force when necessary to get his own way. I caved in and did what he wanted, but I used to remember lying there, counting the minutes until he was done. It made me feel unclean, and the sounds and grunts were like animal mating calls, so not human. He never made love to me. He never seduced me. He just fucked me like a piece of trash and then rolled over to snore. I would lay awake for hours crying myself to sleep. He was the only man I had ever allowed to know that intimate part of me, and I was afraid that if I let another man know, it would never be the same. The ticking of the clock reminded me that I had to go to work soon and was still wide awake. If I continued this pattern of waking up in the middle of the night, my energy would soon be drained, and I would find myself worthless at work as well as at home. Did I really want that? Of course not. But when I was fighting demons, how was I supposed to get rid of them? I didn't know how, and I was afraid of the outcome. In the end, would I be alone? Spencer and Spencer was a large advertising company with glass doors, wooden floors, and huge cubicles throughout. I had an office in the back with a receptionist, Mia Emerson. My cubicle faced downtown Minneapolis and had a large white couch with a glass-top desk and a minibar. I hardly used the bar unless I had clients to entertain, which was seldom, since all entertaining was done elsewhere. When I walked in, Mia had the earpiece on and was talking rapidly into it. She stopped to wave me hello and gave me messages. I smiled at her. Mia was a pretty girl with short black hair and blue eyes. She always wore designer label clothes and shoes. Like today, she sported a red DKNY red dress with black Jimmy Choos. She was a gorgeous girl who made most of the men turn heads, but she was engaged to a very good-looking man and never took a second glance at those men who gawked at her. I walked into my office and took off my black jacket. It was July, but the summer weather had been cooler than usual. I was wearing a black skirt with a red blouse paired with some black pumps, I had my hair done in a braid and coiled up in a bun. I turned on the computer, sat down, and went through my messages. There were a few from clients, and then there was one from my mother. I sighed and set them aside as I opened up my schedule to take a look at what I had. Mia walked in with a steaming cup of coffee and set it down beside me. The Spencer brothers are here and would like to meet with you and Jason as soon as you are in. My hand reaching for my coffee stopped, and I looked up at her. They're here? In the building? She nodded. Yes. Why are they here? I glanced at my schedule again and then back at her. I don't see them on the schedule. Shrugging, Mia said, I'm not sure either, but they specifically asked for you two. 20th floor is calling your name. I cringed. Don't say that. I'm afraid it's the latter. She laughed and backed out of the door. Be brave, Ka Bao. As she closed the door, I sighed deeply. I had never met Maverick or Lincoln, the two brothers who started this company. I had never seen pictures either. What were they doing here, and why were they asking for me and Jason? I hope I wasn't getting fired. I stood up, smoothed down my skirt, and walked out. I found Jason at the elevators waiting for me. Mia gave me a thumbs up as I let out a deep breath and I walked to meet Jason. He was a tall, well-built man with sand-colored hair and brown eyes. He wore a blue suit with a black tie today, making his eyes stand out. He was handsome in a cheek way, which wasn't really my type. I could tell he was as nervous as I was by how he kept tapping his hand against the wall. Ka Bao, do you have any idea why the big dogs want to see us upstairs? Jason asked. Shrugging, I replied, I'm just as lost as you are. He took a deep breath. I hope I'm not getting fired. Yeah, that makes two of us. The elevator doors opened and we stepped in. He reached over and pressed the 20th floor and we began to ascend. The atmosphere seemed like it began to close around us as we got closer and closer to where we were supposed to go. My throat began to feel tight and my hands got sweaty. I wiped them on my skirt just as the doors opened. Jason gestured for me to step out first, and I did. As soon as my heels hit the granite floors, I took in a deep breath. I had never been up here before. The whole floor was designed in black and white with glass doors and windows, large black couches, and glass tables set in a semicircle. Jason took my elbow, and we began walking toward a young lady sitting at the desk with blonde hair. She looked up at us with her blue eyes. You can go right in, she said as she pointed to a double door to our left. We both let in a breath and walked together to the double door. We looked at each other, and then Jason opened the door. I walked in first, and the first thing I saw was a pair of deep sea blue eyes staring up at me from behind a manila envelope with dark black hair. Another man was standing at the window looking out wearing a gray suit that held the same resemblance as the one sitting down. But the one by the window was older with silver dusting his temples. The man by the window turned and looked at us. He was handsome with a soft complexion and a kind smile. Then the sound of a chair scraping against the ground was heard, and I turned around to find the one sitting pushing himself to a standing position. He had dropped the envelope and was now looking straight at me. Holy shit, he was drop-dead gorgeous. His gaze was electrifying with a devilish stare that made my toes curl inside my shoes. He was staring coldly at me, and I stumbled backward only to be caught by Jason's hand. Welcome, the one by the window said. Please, sit down. Jason smiled and helped me settle down in a chair and took one beside me. The two men walked toward us and then took a seat across from us. I noticed that both were wearing gray suits, except the older one was wearing a black tie and the other was wearing a blue tie. The older one had a ring sparkling on his left hand, indicating he was married. The younger one's hand was empty. I'm Maverick, the older one said. This is my younger brother, Lincoln. We're Spencer and Spencer. Jason smiled. Great to meet you both. What is the honor of this meeting? Maverick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've been leading the Thompson account for a while now, haven't you, Mr. Miles? I have, Jason answered. We've been tracking your work, and I have to say it's spectacular. You're doing a great job. Jason beamed. Thank you. We'd like you to move on to a different position. One of our employees has suddenly left, and the position of Director of Marketing is open. We'd like you to fill in." The color drained on Jason's face, and I almost gasped. Director of Marketing was what Jason had been working toward his whole career while here. I could feel the room get smaller, and I saw Jason's hand twitch. The Director of Marketing?" he managed to ask. Maverick nodded. "Yes. We'll raise your salary by 2/3 of what you're making right now, plus a hefty bonus. You'll get a raise every 6 months, and if you can continue your fabulous track record, we'll give you 5% of the shares." Jason laughed. "Wow! I mean, excuse me. Certainly, sir. I would love to take the position." Maverick leaned forward. "Great. You can start tomorrow. My receptionist, Glenda, will gladly give you all the information along with the paperwork to finish the work needed." "Thank you so much." Then Maverick turned to me. "Mrs. Ka Bao," I interrupted him. He was quiet for a moment. "Ka Bao will not be working with you." Jason's smile faded. "She's not? Will she be staying where she is?" "No." Lincoln finally spoke, leaning forward. "She'll be working with me." I turned my gaze to the man who spoke and found his glare to be intense and wild. I swallowed the knot down my throat, almost feeling like my heart skipped a beat. Jason looked from me to him as Maverick cleared his throat. "We've been following your work, Ka Bao, and it's outstanding. Your business nose is what we need here on the top floor. I know that you haven't been here long, but you've proved to us that you know your way around a business deal. The Taiwanese were quite adamant about your work. My brother Lincoln would like to offer you a permanent job as his executive director." My throat went dry, and Jason almost went white. I looked from one to the other, not sure if they were playing games with me or not. Lincoln hadn't spoken again, and they were all staring at me. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I'm not sure I'm qualified for that pay grade," I finally said. "I think you're more than qualified," Lincoln answered coolly. "In fact, I don't think there's anyone else more qualified than you. I've been keeping tabs on your work, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I need you. I need you." Did he just say that? I felt the heat in the room circulate me, and I felt dizzy. I turned to find Jason staring at me, willing me to agree with his eyes. I turned back to find Lincoln looking at me, his forefinger rubbing his chin. I cleared my throat, and I sat up. What exactly will I be doing?" I asked. Lincoln smiled. "You'll be working beside me and handling all my accounts. In a nutshell, you and I will be partners." Why did that sound so sexual? I blinked and found Maverick smirking. I felt a lump form at the base of my throat again. I didn't know what to say. I sat there in silence as all three men stared at me. "It seems we've stunned her into silence," Maverick said. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get my way around this. I really like the position where I am currently at. I like the people I've been working with." "You'll like me," Lincoln said. I hid my surprise. "It's not that I won't, Mr. Lincoln," he corrected me. "Lincoln," I said. "I'm sure we get along fine, but I'm afraid I may not be able to do as you wish. These last accounts were small." "I don't take no for an answer," he said quietly. I finally understood his proposition. He wasn't giving me any room to think. I nodded and stood up. "If you say so, I will take the position, but I make myself clear that I will not accept any bonuses or pay increase. I get the same pay as I did when I was working with Jason." Lincoln stood up. "No. You will take the increase, and you will accept my bonuses. Welcome."
I did a lot of bad things, and never did I give.
Back at my desk, Jason was already celebrating his news with his coworkers as I stumbled over what to think about what just unfolded. He had given me a position I knew I was not qualified for, and a pay increase that made my salary jump to triple its numbers. I should be happy, but I was afraid I would disappoint him. Mia walked in and gave me a hug as she smiled from ear to ear. I just heard. I knew you would be going places, she cried. I gave her a dry laugh. Thanks. She noticed my mood and shrugged. Am I missing something here? You've just been promoted and you're acting like someone died. I frowned. I'm not sure I can do that job. Oh, come on. If anyone can do it, it's you, Ka Bao. I believe you can. I'll miss you dearly, but do remember to come visit me when you have a chance. I smiled and hugged her. Thank you. As she left, I sat down at my desk and looked at my messages. My mother's name was scrawled in black ink, and it was staring at me. I massaged my temple, not really knowing how this day had happened. I sighed deeply and figured if I had been handed this position, then I needed to take better control of myself and my surroundings. I was now an executive director to the president of the company. Just thinking of it made me shake my head in wonder. I leaned back in my chair, and finally, a smile graced my lips, making me feel good. I had to be thankful for what had come my way. Yes, I deserve this. I totally deserve this, and I have worked hard for it. I pushed the negative out of my head and decided to concentrate on the positive. I was now an executive director to the president of the company. Repeat it, Ka Bao, I said. Throughout the day, I finalized some of the paperwork I had from my previous accounts and gathered together everything to put into a portfolio ready to hand to Mia to give to the new person who would take over my job. I received a message from Maverick that I needed to get everything in order to be turned over by Thursday, which gave me another day. I had everything put into order and was working on the last final detail when Jason tapped at my door. I looked up, and he was smiling as he walked in. He'd removed his suit jacket and was wearing his button-down shirt and tie. I guess we woke up on the right side of the bed today, huh? He asked. Smiling, I replied, I'm so happy for you, Jason. I know you've been working on this for a long time. Well, I'll still be stuck here on this floor while you'll be up there with the big dogs. It doesn't mean anything less. He swallowed and then closed my office door, giving us privacy. Look, I wanted to ask you something. I know that you and I have been working together for a while, and you know that I've hinted a few dates here and there. Now that we'll no longer be working side by side, how about I take you out? To celebrate our success, what do you say? Before I could object, my phone began to ring. I held up a finger. Ka Bao Nelson? Ka Bao, Lincoln's voice came on the line. I need to see you, please. Oh, all right. I'll be right up. I hung up and Jason moved forward. Who is that? I stood up. It was Lincoln. He frowned. What does he want? I don't know. How about we pick up this conversation later? When I got out of the elevators on the top floor, I was feeling nervous. His expression still burned me, and I wasn't sure what he wanted. The young lady at the desk smiled at me and pointed for me to enter not the double door I had earlier, but the single door to the left of it. I walked over, knocked, and heard his voice telling me to come in. I opened and walked in, closing it behind me. He was standing by the window with his back turned to me. He had gotten rid of his suit jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, revealing thick, muscled forearms, and unbuttoned his shirt down to the fourth button. We meet again, he said. What can I do for you? I asked. He walked to me and gestured for me to sit down. I took a seat, and he took one across from me. I was hoping we could have an afternoon together to get to know one another. I frowned. What do you mean? I've gone over your resume, your work history, and your file. You're divorced? Going through a divorce, I corrected. He nodded. I'm sorry to hear that. How would you like me to address you? Ka Bao is fine. Good. Please address me by my first name as well. I noticed that when you worked with Jason, you did his meal planning and also ran his daily schedule. I did. His assistant was assisting two other managers, so I helped out whenever it was possible. I don't expect you to do my meal planning. However, I expect you to go to lunches with me when I meet clients. I nodded. Of course. I also expect you to accompany me to charities, events, and dinner parties. I shot my head up. Excuse me? I would need you there to listen, to take notes mentally, and to appear as my partner. Is that what is written down as a duty in the executive director position? He smiled and his eyes twinkled. No, but I am requesting it. Most of the clients will be dealing with you and me directly, and to appear together to close deals or to make an appearance is necessary. I nodded, understanding his point. I understand. Where do you live? Close by. I don't expect you to be here at the crack of dawn, but I do expect you to be here before I arrive, which is at 8 in the morning. That won't be a problem. He stood up and extended his hand to me. We're settled then. I stood up and shook his hand, lightly. I'll see you Friday morning.
I did a lot of bad things, and never did I give in.
Friday arrived faster than I had anticipated, and it had my stomach in butterflies. I picked out a black dress with the red pumps, and as I made my way into Lincoln's office, I noticed that the entire 20th floor was quiet. The young lady at the desk was absent, and there was no noise. When I walked into his office, I set down my briefcase and had just taken a deep breath when I heard the elevator doors opening. I waited, and then I heard footsteps coming to the office. Lincoln appeared before me wearing a black suit and a red tie. A smile graced his lips as he walked in and put down his briefcase. Good morning, he said. Good morning. I didn't know where to go, so I came to your office. He smiled. Your office is being remodeled. You'll take the desk opposite me for now. He pointed to the desk opposite him, and I nodded. I picked up my briefcase and set it down. His phone rang, and he picked it up. Lincoln. I walked out to give him some privacy. As I closed the door, the elevator doors opened, and a young lady who was at the desk appeared wearing a gray dress. She smiled at me, and I returned it. She settled down at the desk just as Lincoln opened the door. Come in, he said. I walked in, and he opened the shades to let in some light. How do you take your coffee? Glenda usually gets my coffee. You don't need to worry about that. I've put together a file for you. Please look it over. We'll be meeting with a client at lunch. I took the folder he handed me, and our fingers brushed. I pretended to not let it bother me that I felt something. I walked to sit down at my desk and opened the folder up. He excused himself and walked out. I remained seated, looking over the paperwork. The company, Waldy Inc., was a business built by James Waldy, an older gentleman who wanted to give back to the world by creating investment opportunities for those in need. He had funded some of the world's foremost researchers and was now making millions by taking royalties from the companies he helped build. But he was slowly losing his spark when it came to the public eye. He needed something new, and that was where we came in. He wanted us to design him a new ad that would market his investment deals to the foreign countries. He wanted to be labeled as a god. I glanced at his picture. He had white hair and blue eyes and was wearing a $1,000 suit. He looked the part of a god. But was he really one? I spent the morning going through the details of the business and making sure I didn't miss a mark. At noon, Lincoln returned and we walked out together to meet James Waldy. We took the company's SUV and drove a few blocks down to the bar and grill. When the SUV parked on the street, we got out and headed inside. It wasn't as busy as I had thought, and I spotted James immediately. He was seated at a table looking over the menu. He looked up as Lincoln and I got closer. He stood up and extended his hand. Lincoln, he said, his voice smooth and low. James, this is my executive director, Ka Bao. He took my hand. Pleasure. Likewise. We all sat down, and James immediately got into business. I'm ready to hear what you can offer me. I've had several good offers from around the area. Most of them are your competitors. So I'm looking to hear that you'll offer me something I have not heard of yet. Lincoln didn't seem intimidated by it. James, you understand that if you're talking to our competitors, then our time here is done. You can't play catch and release with both of us. He laughed. You're very smart. But a man like me has to keep his options open. I only fish with the big ones. Of course you do. but remember that your lure is not very attractive. James' smile faded. Look, why don't you just skip the bullshit and start talking? I was appalled by his attitude. Lincoln, however, didn't flinch. James, you've been running your business for what, 10 years now? Why the sudden redesign? You and I both know that redesign is a death sentence. You've created a name for yourself. You're well known by your same aprons. Why now? Why the sudden change? I need an eye-opener to make me more visible. How are you not visible? Your billboards speak for themselves. You're not a small name. Most companies that are looking for money automatically think of you as their first source to go to. James smiled and leaned back in his chair. They do, but that's because they're supposed to. But I need bigger. I need bigger and better. The companies that have been contacting me are just small-time bullshitters. I need the real deal, the mega millions. Lincoln smiled. You're telling me that after 10 years you're not a mega million company? How do you expect me to not believe that? Then I remembered something from my reading. Mr. Waldy, pardon me, but how is your lawsuit going? Lincoln switched his gaze to me, and so did James. Excuse me? James asked. I cleared my throat. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're being sued for fraud, am I right? You took one of the companies you're investing in for a spin, and now they're taking you to the cleaners. Is that the cause for this sudden change of design? He remained mute. I continued. Spencer & Spencer won't require you to give us all the details. However, if we are to represent you and give you an ad that would tie our name to yours, it would be good if you start by being honest with me and Lincoln. As you know, Spencer & Spencer have been doing your ads for the last 10 years, and they've stayed the same. If you change it as a way to avoid a lawsuit, we can countersue you. James' face turned white. You better get your facts straight, young lady. Lincoln turned to face James. If my partner is wrong, why the sudden loss of color? I wasn't made aware of any lawsuits against you. You have not come forward about them. He pointed a finger at us. It's bogus. It's not true that I stole money from Right Heart. I stood up. I never said it was Right Heart. Thank you so much. I hope that you are enjoying this story. This story will be continuing in part 2 soon. I'll catch you in the next episode.
I did a lot of bad things, and never did I give